Hi everyone, Stepan here. Today I'm going to start the series on the Benoni Defense, which is one of the most aggressive defenses to the queen's pawn to d4. One of the most aggressive, one of the riskiest, one of the most interesting, and one of the most popular at the same time. So, the Benoni was named after a book by Aaron Reinganum, written in the 19th century. He wrote a book on several King's Gambit and Queen's Gambit defenses for black, and he named the book Benoni, which in Hebrew means the son of sorrow. So the very name of the opening sounds kind of dangerous. The fun fact, Benoni is also a city in South Africa, so what do you think about that? Anyway, the Benoni is one of the most popular defenses against pawn to d4, and it requires skill, tactical ability, and courage to play. In this introductory video, I'm going to share the main plans and ideas for both sides. I'm also going to quickly go through the main variations of the Benoni. There are 4 of them. And then I'm going to make a detailed video on each. So there are going to be 4 more videos in the series in which I'm going to cover each of the 4 variations, the Modern Benoni, the Czech Benoni, the Old Benoni, and the Banco Gambit in a lot of detail, and I hope to cover everything that's important. So let's start. What is the Benoni? So after d4, black can enter the Benoni via 2 different move orders. He can either go, which is far more popular, knight f6, and then after white plays c4, the main move expanding in the center, black can play the move c5. That's one way. The other way is to, after d4, play the move c5 immediately. This has a name. This is the Old Benoni Defense. It can transpose to some lines of the closed Benoni or the Czech Benoni, but it has independent variations as well, and it's different to the closed Benoni. So let's focus for the moment on the main way to enter the defense. Knight f6, c4, and c5 by black. Now, in this position, black is challenging the center immediately, and he is giving white several interesting options. So first of all, white can simply ignore that and continue developing with knight f3 or e3. And that could then lead to positions which you could see in the symmetrical English or something else, and it's not as ambitious. Taking on c5 is not considered good because black has challenged your center for a reason, and black is going to be able to use the fact that you have just got rid of your central pawn. So this is similar to the Sicilian defense, to the open Sicilian, where white plays e4, black plays c5, let's say knight f3, d6, and at some point white is going to play the move d4, black takes with his c5 pawn, white recaptures with the knight, and you have the same imbalance, white giving up his d2 pawn for black's c7 pawn. You have the same thing here. So after something like e6, black is going to be able to recapture that pawn, and he's going to have a quite comfortable position. So after the move c5, taking or doing something else is firstly considered unambitious. Secondly, it's just not as good as the main move. So the main move is d5. And d5, first of all, for white, takes space in the center, but more importantly, it renders black almost impotent in the center, and it makes it really hard for him to play. Why is that? Well, the d5 pawn is controlling c6 and e6. It's therefore going to be quite hard for black to break open this structure. Therefore, black needs to react immediately. He plays the move e6, challenging the center. Now, if white takes, black is just going to recapture with the f pawn and then have an easy time playing the move d5 later on, even dislodging the c pawn from the defense of the center, and black is simply going to have an easy position. So white is going to ignore that with knight to c3, and black is now going to take the pawn. White takes with the c pawn, and black plays the move d6. This is the Benoni structure and the key position to understand in the Benoni defense. This is called the Modern Benoni, so we are now going over the Modern Benoni, but it is the most thematic way to play the opening, and learning the Modern first is going to make it easier to play all the other lines. So what can we say about this position? What can we say about the Benoni? First of all, the Benoni is a very ambitious defense. It's very ambitious because black is not trying to equalize, he's trying to get a better position. Now, that comes at the downside. It's very, very risky. So it's ambitious but risky. It's a counter-attacking defense in which you don't aim for a slow position in which you just get 0-0 when you equalize something like the King's Gambit or some variations of the Slav or the semi-Slav. You accept the fact that you have structural weaknesses, but in compensation for that, you get dynamic play. So what's the main theme of this opening? I believe that the name Son of Sorrow should be given to the d6 pawn and not to the whole opening, because this pawn is the biggest weakness in the position, and white's entire play against the Benoni is going to revolve around weakening this pawn. On the other hand, black gets something here. If we look at the position, the first thing that's obvious here is that white has an extra pawn in the center and on the king side, black has an extra pawn on the queen side. And if you've read some old chess books and some old analysis, something from Botvinnik, for example, which John Nunn in his book Understanding Chess Middle Games criticizes at the very first page, that's overestimating the power of the pawn majority, but underestimating it is not a smart thing to do either. So here, black has a 3-2 pawn majority on the queen side, and since his c5 pawn is already advanced past the d5 pawn, it's a pure pawn majority which black can easily use. What does that mean? Well, if black just pushes his pawns, he's going to have an extra pawn, and he's going to be able to create a passed pawn. So trade all the pieces of the board, black is going to be quicker to create a passed pawn, and that's going to be dangerous. So that's black's compensation. He has play on the queen side. Furthermore, white plays the move e4. That's just the main move. Black plays g6, and now white can go for several different variations. I just want to show you that this setup of fianchettoing the Kingside Bishop for black in the Benoni is very powerful, because the g7 bishop, as you can see, is exerting pressure on the part of the board where black is stronger. And strategically, it's always smart to attack where you have a stronger position. If you divide the board in two, white is obviously stronger on the king side than in the center, black is stronger on the queen side. Therefore, bishop g7 is a much better idea than bishop e7 and castling, because the bishop on e7 would be fighting against too many white soldiers, as you can see here, and that would be useless. So the g7 bishop is positioned here for a very good reason. It's going to help a queenside pawn push. It's going to help black exert pressure on the queen side. White, on the other hand, plays in the center and on the king side. So very often we are going to see moves like f4, where white is trying to punish black for playing this sort of position right away. And one of white's main breaks in this opening is the move e5. If white can get in e5, then he's going to be slightly better. So f4 is just the most aggressive approach. The other approach white could take is knight to f3, and here one of the main maneuvers for white can be seen immediately. So this f3 knight is very often going to go to d2, from d2 to c4, and on c4 this knight is going to be fulfilling two most important roles in this position: putting pressure on d6 and helping white push e5. So that's just one idea for white. Black, on the other hand, is going to try to play the move b5. b5 is black's main break. One common pattern is, of course, preparing b5 with the move a6. But thematically, and this you can remember as a general rule, it's not a real rule, whenever black plays a6, that's a signal he's playing b5 on the next move. As white, you play the move a4 to put the brakes on that. Then we are going to be discussing different ways to force through b5 and what you get from that and what white gets in the meantime. So whenever your opponent plays on the flank, you play in the center. When he plays in the center, you play on the flank. So in compensation for a6, b5, first of all, white gets time. Secondly, he can often break through in the center, and you can see that if white successfully plays e5, then d5 becomes a very dangerous passed pawn, and the position gets tricky for black to play. So white has counterattacking chances, black has counterattacking chances. It's a type of defense similar to the Sicilian or the King's Indian, where the move order is important, the theory, the knowing theory is very important. One mistake could lead to trouble, and imprecise moves or not knowing the patterns could lead to trouble as well. So, but the good thing about the Benoni is, even though it's a theory-heavy opening, if you know the patterns, if you know the main plans, it's going to be easy to play. You are going to be able to find your way around the position, even if you don't know the exact position. Even if you don't know what exactly is the correct move here. So the modern Benoni is the most thematic position. This is going to be the first video in the series, which is going to be published tomorrow. And if you learn the modern Benoni, as I said, it's going to be easier to learn all the rest. Now, moving on, we are now going to be looking at this position. This is the closed or the check Benoni. This has been played by Vishy Anand when he was younger. Yasser Seiravan has played it. Ben Feingold still plays it if you've seen any of his videos. The opening looks absolutely absurd. Doesn't make too much sense to give this much space to white. Let me just show you how the opening is reached. So after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5. If you remembered, in the modern Benoni, black was fighting for the center with e6. In this position, he plays the move e5. Now, again, taking on e6, it would be the same thing as against the modern Benoni. If you take, black is just going to take with the f-pawn and have an easy time playing d5. So after e5, you, again, as white, play the move knight c3. And now black closes the position down d6. White now closes his part of the board, rendering black unable to expand further with e4. And now this position is tricky to play. You need to have experience. Most of all, you need to understand the power of pawn breaks. As you can see, you have pawn breaks on both sides of the board. You want to break the position up on the side of the board where your pawn chain is facing. The funny thing is that for black, the pawn chain is facing both towards f4 and towards b4. So what black wants to do is either play b5 or play f5. More commonly, it's going to be f5. But b5 is also a common plan. For white, of course, it's going to be either b4 or f4. So the general rule in the check Benoni is whoever breaks the position open first to his own advantage is going to be better. So very often you are going to see moves like, okay, let's say bishop e7, g3 castles, bishop g2, knight e8. Knight e8 is a common maneuver. Firstly, it allows black to play f5. Secondly, black can continue preparing the move f5, let's say knight g2, e2, because you want to keep f4 as an option. Knight d7 developing, let's say castles, g6, and now this knight is coming to g7, okay, let's say bishop h6, which is the main move, knight to g7, supporting f5, and now you can see already that the c8 bishop, the f8 rook, the g6 knight, the g7 knight, and the g6 pawn are all supporting f5. When the position opens up, it's going to actually be favorable for black that he is putting the brakes on white's play in the center. Of course, in the check Benoni, the d6 pawn is not such a big weakness. How do you target it? You can target it from b5, but that could easily be resolved with a6. I'm not saying that it's not a problem, but it's not as big of a problem as it is in the modern Benoni. Okay, the old Benoni is the next variation I'm going to cover. The old Benoni starts after d4 and the immediate c5. White again reacts with d5, and here you can play e5, you can play knight f6, you can play d6. d6 is considered to be the proper old Benoni if you don't want to transpose. Of course, if you continue with e5, then you're just going to get the closed Benoni again. We have the same position. So after d5, d6 is the old Benoni. Something like e4 by white, knight f6, knight c3, g6. You can see that the difference is in the old Benoni that you don't trade off your e-pawn for white's c-pawn, of course, because the c-pawn is not there. And allowing the trade of your e-pawn for white's e-pawn wouldn't be wise, because then you don't have a pawn majority on the queen side and you still have a d6 weakness. So the old Benoni is slower, different plans, still a very interesting variation. And since it's not as popular as the modern Benoni or the check Benoni, it might be a good weapon to add to your repertoire. And finally, we are now looking at the Benko gambit. d4, knight f6, c4, c5, the Benoni, d5, the most thematic move. Now again, you can go for several different moves, e5, e6. The Benko gambit is the move b5. b5, and I've played the game in the Benko against the FIDE master just yesterday, is a very strong opening. Very tricky to play against, but also very tricky to play. So what you're doing is you're relinquishing white of his central control by provoking the c pawn to take on b5. And the main move is, of course, to take on b5. Now, once white has captured this pawn, you can see immediately that it's much easier for black to play in the center. The c pawn is not there, meaning that d4 is weaker, the c5 is free to move, the c5 pawn is free to move, and you basically have a much easier time in the center. For that, of course, you have given up a pawn. The main move here is a6. Now white can accept the gambit fully with b takes a6, which I've played yesterday. You can also go b6, which is the pawn return variation, so-called, or you can simply ignore all of that stuff and play the move e3, going for the modern variation and trying to develop your pieces, saying to black, well, take my pawn back, I need some time to develop, and I don't want an extra pawn. So these four we are going to be looking at in 4 different videos. The strange thing about the Benoni for me, because every time I start an opening, I'm covering variations. With the Benoni, we have 4 different openings. The modern, the Czech, the old, and the Benko gambit are 4 completely different openings. And that's why it's going to be very interesting for me to do that. And hopefully, when I have finished the series, you will have gained 4 different weapons to choose from in your repertoire with black. Now, to finish this introductory video, I just want to say that the Benoni is now one of the 3 defenses I play against d4. So it's not just another opening. I'm covering this is something I'm very interested in, and this is something I will play myself. I will usually go for the modern or for the old Benoni. The Benko gambit, I'm too old for that. So this is something I don't have playing experience in yet, or at least not a lot of experience, but I'm trying to understand as much as I can about it, and I already know a lot of theory. I've been through 3 different books on the defense, and I just keep getting more and more fascinated. I mean, it's been played by Tal, Fischer, Kasparov, Topalov. Very strong tactical players have played it. Just if you want to follow this video up with something, Game 3 Fischer Spassky. The first win by Fischer in 72 is an incredible Benoni. So just go and look at that if you want. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Hope you like this introductory video. We are going to continue tomorrow with the modern Benoni, and stay tuned for more chess. Bye bye.